Okay, hello mga students. This is our next video lecture. Expound natin yung responsibility for the prevention and detection of fraud and error. Again, this is a continuation of our initial discussion, pero doon kasi in-identify lang natin ano-ano yung ibang klase ng mga frauds. At in-explain lamang natin yung error at saka yung fraud with reference to a separate video lecture. Ngayon, upuan natin, okay? Maupo ka kung nakatayo ka. Sir, ang corny. Okay. No, pag-usapan natin ano yung responsibility, kaninong responsibility ang pagpe-prevent at pagde-detect ng fraud and error at ano naman yung role ng auditor. Okay. Now, the responsibility for the prevention and detection of fraud and error rests with management and those charged with governance. Please take note, ang may responsibilidad para makaiwas at makapag-detect ng mga fraud and errors ay ang management at saka yung mga in charge sa governance, yung mga board of directors, Hindi po si auditor. Ang sinasabi sa PSA 240, Sir, ano po yung PSA 240? Oh, that is a good question. Now, to answer that, I have attached in our Google Classroom, and this is true for my actual students, meron akong nilagay dyan na handbook from the IAASB for the standards and auditing. Makikita po ninyo dyan ano-ano yung mga standards and auditing na ito. Pati na rin po yung other standards. Okay? Paki-check po nun. Sabi sa PSA 240, yung management dapat is required na mag-establish ng control environment and to implement internal control policies and procedures designed po yung control environment. Ano yung mga internal controls? I know you are already familiar with this one. Okay? Because that was already discussed in previous accounting subjects. Under your COSO framework, you have your control environment. Yung mga components ng COSO framework, yung shortcut natin doon ay crime. C stands for, actually, itong control environment, nasa E ito kasi yung C sa crime ay control activities, risk assessment, information and communication, monitoring, and then the control environment. Para lang meron tayong acronym na madaling kabisaduhin. So, I will be attaching a link or a reference after this video lecture is uploaded in my YouTube channel, in our playlist. May reference po tayo doon sa aking discussion on control, on the COSO framework. But dito, sabi sa PSA 240, dapat si management ay mag-establish. Meron dapat siyang control environment at magpatupad ng mga internal control policies and procedures para makapag-detect and prevent ng fraud and error. Okay, now, pagdating naman sa individuals charged with governance, ensure the integrity of an entity's accounting and financial reporting system and that appropriate controls are in place. So, dapat naman po, on the side of those charged with governance, dapat nare-retain natin yung integrity ng mga financial reporting systems natin. Okay, our accounting systems. At meron tayong controls na naka-in place dyan. Okay, we have appropriate controls. Okay? Now, pagdating naman sa auditor, ano yung kanyang responsibility? Ang sabi dito, although the annual audit of financial statements may act as a deterrent to fraud and error, okay, we can we can deter the occurrence. Pwede po nating maiwasan na ang pagkakaroon ng mga fraud and errors, The auditor, highlight kinapslak ko, is not and cannot be held responsible, okay, for the prevention of fraud and error. Please take note, hindi po siya dapat maging responsable sa pag-prevent ng fraud and errors kasi this is the responsibility of management and those charged with governance. Sir, paano yung detection? Okay? Remember that the auditor's responsibility, and this I captured from the previous slide, is to design the audit. para magkaroon tayo, makapag-provide ng reasonable assurance of detecting material misstatements in the financial statements. So this is where the responsibility of the auditor comes in, to design the audit to provide reasonable assurance of detecting material misstatements that may arise from error and frauds, and even your non-compliance with laws and regulations. But the auditor cannot be held responsible for the prevention. Pagdating sa detection, okay, limited sa pagpo-provide ng sufficient na audit programs to design the audit in such a way na magkaroon tayo ng reasonable assurance. But again, hindi po ito absolute assurance because of inherent limitations. Now, ano ba to? Ba't nag-i-skip? So, ito po ang tinutukoy ko kanina na pwede kong i-reference sa inyo if you want a detailed discussion of the 5 components of the COSO framework. Okay, ito po siya. Okay? COSO framework for internal control. Naka-question mark. Ayan na naman tayo, na-OC na naman tayo. So, I'm not sure if that's a question mark. But I will be including the reference in our playlist for this subject para hindi nyo na ito hahanapin. Makikita na lang po ninyo after this video lecture. Now, the auditor's responsibility, we can categorize them in the different phases of audit. Okay? Okay, let's define first the auditor's responsibility pagdating sa planning phase. So as you will see here, in-identify na natin yung mga phases of audit. The planning phase and then followed by your testing phase and then the completion phase. Pagdating sa planning phase, sa audit planning, the auditor should make inquiries of management. Dapat magtanong-tanong tayo sa management about any possibility na magkaroon ng misstatement sa ating FS because of fraud and error. It may include, your inquiry with management may include their assessment of risk due to fraud. Kasi as part of the COSO framework, if they have a well-established na internal control system, part of their risk, it will be part of the risk assessment. Okay? Yung management assessment of risks due to fraud. Are there control established to address the risk? May mga internal controls po ba tayo dyan? And any material error or fraud that has affected the entity or suspected fraud that the entity is investigating. Currently po ba, ma'am, sir, are you aware of any suspected fraud? Okay? Na iniimbestigahan po ninyo. We can inquire with the legal department, sa mga abogado para mas masagot nila ito ng mabuti. Okay? So that may be an inclusion of the audit in the audit planning. The auditor should assess the risk that fraud or error may cause the FS to contain material misstatements. Okay? And remember, when we are talking of assessment of risk, meron kasi tayong tinatawag na fraud triangle. Okay? Ano ba yung mga considerations natin dyan? Or ano ba itong fraud triangle na ito? Ano ba yung mga fraud risk factor? Now, for that one, yung ipinakita ko sa inyo, or yung video lecture before this one, yung nilink ko na fraud and fraud schemes, it discusses your fraud risk factors. Ano ba itong tinatawag natin na fraud risk factors? Okay, so it may help watching or studying that video lecture. Now, under the testing phase naman, please take note, ito planning phase. Dito naman, sa testing phase, okay, number 1, during the course of the audit, the auditor may encounter circumstances that may indicate the possibility of fraud or error. Ito, in progress na yung audit natin, nagpe-perform na tayo ng mga audit procedures. Baka, meron kayong mga ma-encounter na mga circumstances, pagkakataon, na maaring magkaroon, na maaring yung mga circumstances na yon ay indicative of fraud or error. Okay, now, kapag na-encounter natin yung ganong scenario, the auditor should perform procedures necessary to determine whether merong mga material misstatements. Now, after identifying material misstatements in the financial statements, The auditor should consider whether such misstatements resulted from a fraud or an error. Okay, we have to identify kung na-identify natin merong material misstatement, saan galing ito? Ito ba ay arising from fraud or error? If error kasi yan, kinakailangan natin ng adjustment sa FS sa mga balances. Pero kapag fraud yan, may iba pa yung mga audit implications. It will require us further audit procedures. Now, in assessing kung yung material misstatement ay arising from fraud, we have to consider the following. Kasi nga may implications yan. Kung yung misstatement arising from fraud, okay, is not immaterial, the auditor should refer the matter to the appropriate level of management, at least one level above those involved. So kung yung fraud na discover natin on the supervisory level, at least we have to refer to the management because at least one level above those involved. Kung nasa supervisory function yung fraud, i-refer natin ito sa appropriate level of management, one level above them. And be satisfied, given the position of the likely perpetrator, the fraud has no other implications for other aspects of the audit, or that those implications have been adequately considered. So dapat masatisfy daw yung auditor. Okay, I'm satisfied. Okay? Not that satisfaction on what? Na yung fraud na yan, kung immaterial yan, wala yung ibang implikasyon sa audit natin. At yung mga implications na yon ay na-consider po natin. Okay? Now, kung ito naman ay material, kung yung material misstatements, arising from fraud, hindi ko na uulitin kasi redundant. Material misstatement is material. If the misstatement is material, o kaya naman, we are unable, if we are the auditors and we were unable to evaluate the effect of the financial statement, whether or not it is material, okay, we should conduct the following. Una, consider natin yung implication for other aspects of the audit, particularly yung reliability ng management representations. Okay, magiging reliant. Papaniwalaan ba natin yung mga pinagsasasabi ng management? Material yung ating misstatements. O kaya naman, we cannot evaluate it kung immaterial siya or material. So we have to consider the implications sa iba nating audit procedures. At saka, mapagkakatiwalaan pa ba yung pinagsasasabi ng mga management? Kasi remember, yung assertions is the management representation. Second, discuss the matter and the approach to further investigation with an appropriate level or that is at least one level above those involved. So we have to discuss the matter and discuss with them paano yung magiging approach natin for that investigation, one level at least, okay, above those involved. And then, attempt to obtain evidence to determine whether a material fraud in fact exists. And if so, ano yung effect nila? And last, suggest that the client consult with legal counsel about questions of law. So, kung siyempre fraudulent activities yung pinag-uusapan natin dito. Merong mga pandaraya, So we have to recommend to suggest with the client that they should consult with legal counsel. Okay? Para sa mga questions affecting matters of law. So, yun po ang mga kinakailangang i-consider. Now, what else? Pagdating naman sa completion phase, the auditor should obtain a written representation from the client management. Ano yung kinakailangan natin sa management? Ano yung dapat nakasulat doon? Una, na ina-acknowledge nila yung responsibility for the implementation and operations of accounting and internal control systems that are designed to prevent and detect fraud and error. Okay? So, acknowledgement of responsibility for the implementation and operations of control systems. Pangalawa, na yung management they believe that the effects of those uncorrected FS misstatements na inaggregate ng auditor during the audit ay magiging immaterial. Okay? Both individually and in aggregate. Okay? Individually, okay, every instances, every occurrence. In the aggregate, pag pinagsama-sama ba natin itong mga observations natin, itong ating mga identified na misstatements arising from fraud, immaterial pa rin ba yan pag pinagsama-sama? Okay? To the financial statements taken as a whole. A summary of such items should be included in or attached to the written representation. What else? Na i-disclose, no, ng management sa mga auditors lahat ng mga significant facts relating to any fraud. Okay? Na nakipag-usap si management sa mga auditors at na-disclose na ni management lahat ng mga available information, available facts, significant facts as of the moment that they are aware of. Okay? Of any fraud or suspected frauds, okay, known to management na may maaring makaapekto sa company, sa entity. And lastly, dinidisclose nito sa mga auditors yung result ng kanilang risk assessment, no? Na yung financial statement may be materially misstated as a result of fraud. So, eto po ang mga nilalaman ng written representation na ipoprovide ni management sa mga auditor. Okay? For the responsibility of the auditor should obtain that written representation. Okay? Now, what else? Meron pa tayo dito, ano? When the auditor believes, no? Kapag sinabi ni auditor at naniniwala siya na mayroong material error or fraud, he should request the management to revise the financial statements. Siyempre, material error or fraud yan, maapektuhan yung ating financial statements. So, dapat i-modify yan, i-revise yan. Otherwise, hindi makakapag-provide ng unqualified opinion yung auditor. He or she will have to express a qualified or adverse opinion. Pag-uusapan po natin eventually, ano-ano yung iba't ibang klase ng mga audit opinions. Nabanggit na rin kasi natin before yung unqualified opinion. Nabanggit na rin dito, qualified or adverse. Okay? Tapos dito may disclaim pa, yung disclaimer. Okay? Sa ngayon, we are already made aware or familiar with the terms, but as to the definitions or ano yung nilalaman ng audit report kapag unqualified, qualified, adverse, or disclaimer, pag-usapan natin yan eventually. If the auditor is unable, para pumiyok tayo doon, if the auditor is unable to evaluate the effect of fraud on the financial statements because of a limitation on the scope, scope limitation, hindi tayo nakapag-evaluate ng fraud, okay, effect ng fraud sa FS. Because of scope limitation, the auditor should either qualify or disclaim his opinion on the financial statements. Okay? So that is more of ano yung magiging audit report natin. Kapag meron tayong scope limitation or kapag ayaw magpa-revise ng FS ni management, will we qualify? Will we provide an adverse? Okay? Or a disclaimer of opinion. Okay? So yun po Now, reminder. Because of inherent limitations, there is an unavoidable risk. Hindi natin maiiwasan na risk, that material misstatements in the financial statement resulting from fraud and error may not be detected. Therefore, subsequent discovery of material misstatements, kapag may na-discover daw tayo ng mga material misstatements, hindi ibig sabihin nun na epic fail si audit, sa pagdi-discover nung mga fraud na ito. Okay, remember that the auditor's responsibility is to design an audit to provide reasonable assurance to detect. Pero, kung sabi nga, because of inherent limitation, hindi maaring may mangyari, there is an unavoidable risk na hindi natin ito ma-discover, pero hindi ibig sabihin na kasalanan ito ni auditor. Kasi remember, the responsibility to prevent and detect errors and fraud lies with management and those charged with governance. Lagi po ninyo yang tatandaan. Okay? and it is not an indicative of the auditor's failure to adhere to the basic principles and essential procedures of an audit. Now, also, pangalawang check, the risk of not detecting a material misstatement resulting from fraud is higher than the risk of not detecting misstatements resulting from error. Mas mataas yung risk mo na hindi ka makadetect ng fraud as compared sa error. Kasi pag fraud, maraming pinagpaplanuhan niyang mabuti. Yung error, unintentional naman, di ba? Also, the risk of not detecting a material misstatement resulting from management fraud is greater than for employee fraud. Mas mataas yung risk mo na magkaroon ka ng management fraud as compared sa employee fraud. Kasi pag management fraud, they can circumvent the controls that are in place. No? Pwede nila yung i-override. Ito yung tinatawag natin na management override of control. As compared pag employee fraud, ng mga misappropriation of assets, na ikaw pala ay employee ni 7-Eleven or ni Family Mart, nagnakaw ka ng ng isang candy, isang sneaker. That is already an employee fraud, no? Pag management fraud, hindi lamang po yung management may mga collusions involved yan. Okay? So, yun class, hanggang dito muna tayo sa video lecture na ito. I hope natutunan po ninyo ang discussion na ito at kung meron kayong mga questions, okay, please let me know para ma-accommodate ko kayo. Alright, thank you very much. I'll see you sa susunod. Okay? Bye-bye.